Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gersh1, and today we're going to be talking about the Carcharodons. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day, and if you have any suggestions, please comment down below. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Carcharodons. The Carcharodons are a loyalist Space Marine chapter of the 23rd Founding, who are a alleged successor chapter of the Raven Guard. The Carcharodons participated in the latter stages of the Badab War, returning from the Outer Void to punish those they saw as traitors to the Imperium and the Emperor. The Carcharodons are a mysterious and enigmatic chapter, having forged for themselves a dark and bloody legend in the minds of those that survived the conflict known as the Badab War, returning from the black void of space beyond the farthest reaches of the galaxy as strangers to both friend and foe alike. The Carcharodon sided with the Loyalists against those that would challenge the Imperium of Man. The exact origins of this infamous chapter are hard to pinpoint in the Imperial archives, as the Carcharodons have left no record of their activities in recent history. They feature nowhere within the open Imperial records, and likewise the chapter has no officially recorded battle honors. This chapter is often misidentified with other lesser-known chapters operating with similar appearance, often being mistaken for the Void Reapers or Blood Sharks. However, sealed and secured records within the Inquisition may shed some light as to the true origins of this chapter. The oldest of these ancient treaties on the wars of the Imperium of Man may be found within the pages of the Mythos Angelica Mortis, written by the savant scribes of the Secretariat Militum of Terra. References are made to this vague and incomplete work to the Space Marine chapter identified as the Carcharodon Astra. The text states they were dispatched into the outer darkness upon an endless voyage to ravage the foes of mankind, and to set about the traitor, the alien, and the renegade without mercy, and herald them into their place of strength. This text stems from a far older work, now lost, dating back to the unknown era that surrounded the Astropath Wars of the 32nd and the early 33rd millennium. Other records give this chapter variations in name or title, such as the Space Sharks, but all other accounts are consistent on certain similarities of iconography and operation, and in their description of the Carcharodons' bestial but calculated savagery. This chapter was afforded the sacred and unending duty to travel the interstellar night beyond the Imperium's borders to locate and destroy the enemies of mankind before they could penetrate Imperial space. The only other tantalizing clues to this chapter's origins can be offered up by those Imperial servants who have had the dubious honor of encountering the enigmatic Carcharodons in the flesh. For the most part, these individuals have been those dispatched to explore the outermost bounds of the galaxy, explorators, rogue traders, and the like. Beyond these rare encounters recorded in various fragmented Imperial data vaults, the only information forthcoming on the Carcharodons are the stories of their often bloody deeds across the galaxy. As previously mentioned, what few records exist about the Carcharodons suggest that they are entirely fleet-based, which in turn would suggest that they have fundamental differences from other Space Marine chapters. Their long isolation may also have an effect on the chapter's war gear. The few starships observed to be serving the Carcharodons were widely different in design and even the era of their construction, indicating that the chapter likely makes use of whatever vessel they can find, and performs extensive modifications and repairs in order to keep them sailing as long as possible. This carries over into the individual battle brothers as well. Those Carcharodons who have been seen often sport arms of ancient providence. They are far more likely to carry weapons such as the ancient Phobos R017 pattern bolter, or the Mark V Heresy pattern power armor from 10,000 Terran years ago. Although anecdotal evidence indicates that the Carcharodons roughly conform to the tactical and squad doctrines of the Codex Astartes, this does not carry over to its command structure and company arrangement. Instead, the Carcharodons seem to split their chapter into a number of battle companies designed to operate independently. Each has an augmented auxiliary force of scout marines for reconnaissance and evaluation of the enemy, and the dedicated spearhead of Terminator veterans who serve as the company's captain's bodyguard. It seems likely that the Carcharodons ignore reserve companies entirely. Those accounts which report on the Carcharodons indicate that they often seem to abandon the Codex Astartes prescribed symbol and insignia that signify rank and assignment in a battle company. In their place, the Battle Brothers use a wide range of personal and totemic markings corresponding with their primitive tendencies. The Carcharodons are quite unwilling to discuss the intricacies of their chapter's organization. The Carcharodons have been observed to make use of chaplains and librarians, with little deviation from their roles in other chapters. However, apothecaries and tech marines seldom appear outside the Carcharodons' nomad fleets. It is very likely that the Carcharodons recognize the vital role of these space marines and what they play in preserving and maintaining their chapter's very existence, and keep them on hand whenever possible. These last two cadres may have been held in reserve in the chapter's fleet, a not uncommon practice for fleet-based chapters who spend large periods in isolation. Only a few accounts of the Carcharodons exist that tell of the chapter's very disciplined order of deployment and combat, despite the evidence from casual observers that they are a savage chapter in nature. Their tactical deployment and use of shock assault tactics is highly reminiscent of the Black Templars. They both tend to display an overriding desire to close in with the enemy and shatter their foe in bloody personal combat. Despite their long isolation from the Imperium, the chapter and its battle brothers seem deeply, almost incredibly loyal. Most of the Carcharodons encountered have shown reverence toward the Imperial Creed and places of Imperial worship. Many also make a habit of carrying devotional items, such as prayer scrolls, on their war gear. Many Carcharodon battle brothers carry abstract scrimshaw talismans, or decorate their armor with intrinsic and abstract line work. These talismans, etchings, and traceries often depict highly stylized images of fanged mauls, death heads, oceanic predators, and the like. This primitivism likely evolved as a part of the chapter's unique and impenetrable culture over the millennium of isolation. However, all this stands in contrast to the savagery they show to their foes. Merciless is perhaps the best description for the Carcharodons in combat, but even that does not describe the depths of bloody-soaked slaughter to which they are willing to descend. They fight with wild abandon that could even make the most savage Space Wolf Bloodclaw take a pause, and do not ask for or grant mercy to their opponents beyond a quick, though seldom clean death. In a way, they seem to see the universe very much in terms of black and white, enemy and ally. Anyone who stands against the Imperium, for whatever reason, can also expect a brutal demise at the hands of the Carcharodons. The Carcharodons' chapter colors are primarily gray. In many instances, the more conventional emblems of the Imperium are found alongside the idiocentric markings. The Carcharodons' chapter badge is a great white shark on a dark gray field. The fragmentary records of the Carcharodons indicate that the chapter has no set homeworld. This is not uncommon for Space Marine chapters. The renowned Black Templar chapter, for example, operates solely from its substantial warfleet as part of a perpetual crusade. The Carcharodons do not appear to follow the Crusade chapter pattern of operation, relying instead on a much more rarer operational strategy known as a Nomad Predation pattern. The Nomad Predation pattern evolved in use by the Space Marine chapters and certain rogue trader fleets operating beyond the Imperium's boundaries for extended periods of time. It refers to an entirely self-contained force that can sustain itself without any Imperial support. A Nomad Predation fleet may contain as many support vessels as true warships, or it may contain void ships capable of both combat and a maintenance repairs. A Nomad Predation fleet voyages endlessly, pausing only to identify and engage its foes. It must choose its target carefully, selecting those within its means to destroy without threatening the fleet's viability as a fighting force. Once it selects the appropriate victim, it can descend upon it quickly and savagely, engaging and destroying in any potential threats or launching spoiling attacks against foes too large to attack in force. The fleet obtains resources from vanquishing foes before vanishing, safe from any potential retaliation. Though one cannot be certain that this is the means of which the Carcharodons operate, the tactics do seem to perfectly fit their preferred operational style. If this is the case, the Carcharodons most likely replenish their ranks in the same manner as those of other chapters that follow the Nomad Predation pattern. Namely, they gather potential initiates from amongst the young of the survivors of their assaults, provided those survivors are human and free of the corruption and influence of the warp. These initiates must be subjected to intensive hypno-conditioning and other harsh procedures designed to strip away any past loyalty, replacing it with the will and attitudes of the Carcharodons. Nobody knows what Primark's gene seed led to the creation of the Carcharodons. Opportunities to study the organs involved have been excessively rare, and the Carcharodons themselves are unhelpful in this regard. The only clues to their origin that the Death Watch may have are from a gene seed extraction performed on a slain battle brother, recovered from a massacre site. The apothecary who performed the extraction later noted that the gene seeds seem untainted, if subject to some long-term degradation. More interestingly, the gene seed bore several genetic markings reminiscent of the Raven Guard bloodline. These markers are uncommon, and the link to the Raven Guard would explain several other details about the Carcharodons as well. The appearance of all Carcharodons share some singular details. They all have grayish, pale skin with almost death-like appearances. Some of the most venerable and ancient Carcharodons have liquid black eyes, without irises or anything else. Beyond this, however, there are no common phenotypes amongst encountered Carcharodons. This suggests that the Carcharodons do recruit from a wide variety of sources, and that their skin color and eye mutation is a result of their gene seed. These traits are similar to some of the physical traits of the Raven Guard. However, even if the chapter does count Corax as its Primark, millennia of genetic drift will likely create distinct differences. Though it has happened only rarely, lone Space Marines in dark gray livery and speaking ancient variants of High Gothic have on occasion arrived on the Fortress of the Death Watch in the Jericho Reach in order to fulfill the obligation of their sworn oath. When pressed, some of these Space Marines have said that they hail from the chapter known as the Carcharodons. However, beyond this rare encounter, recorded in the dusty data vaults of the Watch Fortress Jericho, the only information forthcoming on the Carcharodons are the stories of their fell deeds throughout the Imperium. The Carcharodons are unique in the way that they have arranged their specialist ranks. For instance, the rank of Shadow Lord amongst the chapter is akin to the chapter master. A company master would be similar to a captain in a regular Codex Astartes compliant chapter. Strike leader is the sergeant, and the battle brothers are called Void Brothers. Like many of their fellow chapters, the Carcharodons have been observed making use of librarians within their ranks, with little deviation from their role in other chapters. Most chapters train and test chosen psychers following the ancient ways laid out in the Codex Astartes. Librarians of the Carcharodons are trained in this similar way, and with a few minor traditional variances, have been taught to live by the word of the Codex. They possess a few unique psychic abilities only used by the psychers of this chapter. One of these abilities is called Rendering Maul. The librarian calls forth the avatar of a great oceanic predator, whose maw erupts from the very ground beneath the enemy. The very stone and earth forms into the shape of jaws and teeth that snap shut, consuming all within a shower of gore. The other is called From the Depths. The Carcharodon librarian clouds the mind of his adversaries with a choking mental darkness, amplifying their fear and surprise so that it paralyzes them. Their minds are filled with images of watery depths, of numbing cold, and writhing pelagic shapes, leaving them vulnerable to assault. Carcharodons also refer to their assault marines as Devourers, and Terminator veteran marines as Red Brethren. Tactically, during the Badap War, the Carcharodons operated almost exclusively as a rapid strike force, disdaining any kind of protracted engagement whenever possible, preferring to approach their target either with extreme speed or by stealth, which allowed them to strike with an element of surprise on their side whenever possible. Those few who observe a Carcharodon assault and live would be forgiven for assuming that they were mindless berserkers, unconcerned with tactics or planning, but in fact, the Carcharodons rely on a series of tactics that at their heart are both simple and reliable. Though the Carcharodons seem both contempt and familiar with armored vehicles, the core of their tactics rely on large detachments of mobile Space Marine heavy infantry. In this way, the Carcharodons make use of the bloody prowess of their combat brethren to carry the day in battle. The Carcharodons often endeavor to be the initiators of the combat action and prefer not to fight on the defensive. Tactical operations often begin with a battle company using its integrated Scout Marine force and other reconnaissance units, such as the Land Speeder and the Bike Squads, to probe enemy positions and identify weak points and any target with strategic value. Once identified, the main Carcharodon force hits these points with overwhelming attacks, eschewing predatory bombardment or armored spearheads in favor of complete and overwhelming surprise. They may use drop pods, thunderhawks, or mass teleportation to make their attack. The assaulting force are often a mix of tactical and assault marines, as well as Terminator veterans. Depending on the success of these assaults, the Carcharodons usually follow two responses. If the target position proves well defended, the Carcharodons withdraw. These withdrawals happen almost as quickly as the prior assault, and the Carcharodons fade from the battlefield like ghosts. They patiently reevaluate the strength of the enemy position, then launch another lightning assault at a different point they perceive to be weak. Eventually one of these assaults succeeds, and the Carcharodons press the attack to the hilt. Once they commit fully, they dig deep into the enemy's vitals, endeavoring to do as much damage as possible, especially to vulnerable areas. At this point, the full fury of the Carcharodons is all too apparent, and little survives this stage of the assault. The Carcharodons prefer fighting at close range, either attacking with point-blank weapon fire, or in melee when they have broken through the enemy line. There is one other interesting and somewhat disturbing detail about the Carcharodon assault. Their battles are conducted in complete silence. Any commands from the chapter's leaders are transmitted over a locked and encrypted VoxNet, and the Battle Brothers abstain from using any words or sounds to friend or foe. To see such carnage enacted without a word or cry is chilling, to say the least. When undergoing boarding actions during ship-to-ship void battles, the Carcharodons are known to employ an ancient and crude but unique weapon known as an Ursus Claw. Large, barbed lances that are the size of small escort ships to their own right. Fashioned like massive harpoons, these massive lances puncture through an enemy vessel's hull, and once impaled, the immense spear becomes active, locking to their prey, ravaging inside with magnetic strength. With malicious slowness, the Carcharodon vessels can then recall their spears as the lance retracts back toward the vessel that fired them, dragging them home on massive chains. Once the doomed vessel is within reach of the Carcharodons, they then disgorge their Astartes into the bows of the impaled enemy ship. The blooding could begin in earnest. This technique was first pioneered during the Great Crusade by the barbarous and bloody-handed World Eaters Legion. In the 32nd millennium, across 100 scattered systems in the western marshes of the Segmentum Solar, Chaos Cult uprisings led by a corps of Chaos Space Marine warbands drawn from the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, and World Eater Traitor legions brought entire planetary governments to their knees in a year of blood and anarchy. With whole sectors on the brink of collapse, events took a dramatic turn when a combined force of the Adeptus Astartes emerged from the black depths beyond the Spiral Arm and launched a sudden and overwhelming attack directly upon the uprising's command. Though many loyalist Space Marines fell in glory, the warlord of the traitorous factions were slain, and the uprising fractured into 1,000 localized rebellions, which were soon put down by local Imperial forces. Subsequent inquisitorial studies claim that these Space Marines were drawn from several chapters, including the Carcharodons, Minotaurs, Death Eagles, and the Angels of Absolution. Other evidence, however, including their estimated founding and projected deployment date, contradict these statements, consigning the entire event to conjecture. Between the years 860 and 940 of the 33rd millennium, during the darkened and bloody episode of Imperial history known as the War of the False Primark, which plunged the Segmentum Pacificus into anarchy and is now largely lost to myth and purged from the Imperial record, the Pentarchy of Blood was convened by the High Lords of Terra to enact their judgment. 5 chapters, the Carcharodons, the Carnal Guard, the Death Eagles, the Flesh Eaters, and the Red Talons, were used to systematically destroy 11 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, judge traitorous Perdita, and lay waste to their homeworld, finally drawing the 8 solar decade-long conflict to a close. The 7th Black Crusade was one of the Black Crusades led by the infamous Chaos Champion Abaddon the Despoiler and his Black Legion, launched out of the Eye of Terror in the year 811 of the 37th millennium, when the Blood Angel Space Marine chapter battled against the chaotic hordes of the world of Median. Abaddon singled them out with implacable fury. He led a band of Khorne berserkers into the teeth of the Blood Angel's devastator positions. Even the Blood Angel's own assault troops could not dislodge the frenzied warband and recapture the bodies of their comrades. But there is an obscure reference to the Blood Angels being saved by an unidentified Space Marine chapter of mysterious origin, written within the Canticles of Cassandra Lev. It is the Sainted Sisters' oblique accounts of the wars of the 7th Black Crusade. Within them is found mention of a gray-clad Space Marine chapter who came from the outer night to aid the Imperium, and whose jagged maw did swallow the stars, and whose black gaze did mirror the void of oblivion. In the course of the Canticles, this chapter's ships were sent upon Abaddon's forces following the disastrous defeat and routing of the Blood Angels at Midian, and attacked the pursuing forces, as St. Lev writes, fell upon the servants of the Scald Ones with great fury from the darkness, unseen as the beast that lurks beneath the black waters, death for death, blood for blood. Thus were the sons of Sanguinius bought respite, and did turn back upon their pursuers, so were the damned traitors of the false god driven into ruin. Images of these events can be found upon the walls of the crypt world of Hippolytus, created to house the honored dead of the war, depicted in repeated frescoes and bas-relief. But curiously, the faces of the intervening Space Marines are obscured with featureless discs of black obsidian. Given the largely unknown history of the Starfaring Carcharodons chapter, accounts of their activities can only be constructed from recorded historical incidences and fragmentary records that are believed to have involved the Carcharodons on balance of evidence. The notable engagement is listed by Imperial savants as a special probable encounter of this notorious chapter. During the Angevin Crusade that conquered the Calix Expanse and founded what would eventually become known as the Calix Sector, the rogue trader Basil Horothis led his ship, the Starvenger, and a considerable force of naval armsmen against the debased Dark Eldar pirates on the world of Loth. However, Horothis found his forces much reduced in the fighting on that world of perpetual night, beneath the eternal rolling clouds, and illuminated only by the intermittent flashes of lightning. The rogue trader's armsmen suffered greatly from the savage hit-and-run raid of the Cabal of Shadowed Thorns. Even as Horothis realized his error and made plans to withdraw from Loth's accursed surface, the Cabal of the Shadowed Thorns struck the Starvenger. A sudden attack from a flight of razor-wing fighters crippled the cruiser's main drives, slowing the starship out of low orbit. The damage left Horothis with only one choice: testing his considerable skills as a ship handler. He attempted planetfall aboard the Venger, the ship did not reach the ground easily, and only through the considerable skills of Horothis and his master helmsman, Orgeth Keel, did the Venger survive at all. However, their landing left them in an arguably worse predicament than mere death. Trapped within their beached vessel, Horothis and his crew found themselves surrounded by foes. Quickly, the Dark Eldar encircled the ship and its hastily defensive fortifications, striking at random to kill and capture slaves. All Horothis could do was send out an astropathic plea for deliverance, and use the ship's batteries in an attempt to keep the Xenos pirates at bay. After a solar month, the Venger's guns were all but spent, and many of her crew whisked away in the darkness. The cabal of Shadow Thorns grew bold, and began to press a sustained attack into the downed void ship. The fighting reached the bridge, but as Horothis and his retainers struggled desperately against a press of witch gladiators, help arrived. Suddenly, 2 bolts of bruised color lightning split the mass of witches, slaying some outright and scattering the rest. The strikes left behind 2 hulking gray-clad figures, fuming with hoarfrost and reeking of ozone. Without a pause, the 2 Space Marine Terminators tore into the witches with hissing lightning claws. In moments, the decks were slick with gore, and the panicked remnants were fleeing for their lives. The same happened all across the vessel. The survivors told of hundreds of assault Terminators, though there could not have been more than a dozen, appearing wherever the battle was thickest to rip through the invaders with savage butchery. So fierce was the counterattack that the Dark Eldar quickly fled the Venger. On the shadow-shrouded plains beyond the hall, Thunderhawks disgorged 30 gray-clad warriors armed with bolters and blades. Confusion, fear, and rage overtook the Dark Eldar pirates, and they flew toward the Space Marines. No doubt they intended bloody vengeance. However, the Space Marines awaited the assault implacably, drawn up in a loose rank outside their gunships. They did not fire a single shot, even when beams of dark energy began to crackle overhead. When the fastest Scourger were no more than 100 meters from a Space Marine's line, the Emperor's Chosen sprung their trap. The gloomy surface of Loth knew light for the first time in eons, as searing lance beams split the clouds. In an incredible display of precision targeting, they scoured the ground around the Venger and the Space Marines to boiling lava, incinerating the Dark Eldar to ash. Only then did the Space Marines spring into action, hunting the survivors until they fled, wailing back to their webway gate. In the aftermath of the incident, Horothis spoke briefly with the commander of the Space Marines. Horothis later described the Astartes as deathly pale, with blank black eyes and sharp teeth. Speaking only in ancient High Gothic, he informed Horothis that reinforcement from the Crusade were inbound, and politely but firmly requested a tithe of war supplies from the Venger's vaults. He refused to identify himself or his men, and departed 3 solar days before the arrival of Imperial Navy outriders. It was only after the Crusade's inquisitorial representative questioned Horothis, now busy establishing his estate on Loth, that they realized that these Space Marines belonged to no chapter affiliated with the Crusade, and drew connections between ancient myths of a long-forgotten chapter. In another very well-known tale, arriving without warning in the year 910 of the 41st millennium, the sudden appearance of the Carcharodon's chapter fleet caused alarm for both the Loyalist and Secessionist forces operating within the Maelstrom Zone. An unidentified, fire-blackened Space Marine strike cruiser identified itself with ancient, though still valid, Imperial authorization protocol. The unidentified Space Marine force had come to offer its aid to the Loyalist cause against the Secessionists, claiming to have come in answer to a summon from Terra itself. They identified their chapter as the Carcharodons Astra, using the ancient High Gothic form of their name, or the Space Sharks in Low Gothic, and formally requested the Loyalists' permission to enter the war zone and draw blood. Upon their arrival, the Carcharodons' force commanders, Tiberius, presented the inquisitorial legate in charge of prosecuting the Bad App conflict with notice patent provided to the chapter affirming the rights and titles issued to it by several High Lords of Terra and Inquisitors now long dead. Tiberius even submitted himself for psychic probing and gene sampling. The Inquisitor Legate vouched for the Carcharodons. Lord High Commander Carbal Coln of the Red Scorpions, the Magister Militant or Supreme Commander of all the Loyalist forces, accepted the Carcharodons into his line of battle, although he was still wary of their loyalty and their deviation from the Codex Astartes during their long voyage beyond Imperial space. The Carcharodons were initially deployed to the Endymion Cluster after their return to Imperial space, the territory governed by the secessionist Mantis Warriors chapter, rather than the Bad App sector. They systematically annihilated planets in the cluster known to have harbored the Mantis Warriors, to force that chapter to stop using these hit-and-run tactics and mass their force in defense of these worlds, a strategy that spared the Carcharodons from having to pursue them across the cluster to places where their foes held the advantage of support and local knowledge. In the year 913 of the 41st millennium, during the final battle of the Bad App War on Bad App Primaris, the homeworld of the renegade Astroclaws chapter and Huron, the tyrant of Bad App, the Carcharodons sabotaged the ancient atomic and geothermal reactors which powered the world's hive cities and fed its hungry planetary defense batteries with energy. This resulted in a planetary tectonic upheaval, with entire hive city sectors collapsing in yawning chasms that opened up in the ground beneath them, replaced by seas of molten lava. After the death of Bad App Primaris, the remaining secessionists from the Astroclaws, Executioners, Mantis Warriors, and Lamenters chapters were put on trial before a special convened consentorial court of their peers in the Adeptus Astartes. Before departing the Maelstrom Zone for good, the Carcharodon's chapter fleet returned to the Endymion Cluster. There, with the agreement of the Firehawks, they struck at the Tranquility System, whose worlds were once the primary recruiting and training ground of the Mantis Warriors. From these worlds, they harvested an entire generation of recruits to renew their own losses, forcing those they selected to fight to the death to prove their worth in order to survive as Carcharodon neophytes. Thus paid in blood, the Carcharodon fleet departed, the last known sighting of them made by the explorator Augury Beacon, which marked them tacking course from the warp, ascending above the galactic plane and into the blackness of the outer void once more. The current whereabouts and operational activities of the Carcharodons remains unknown. The Firehawks' own disappearance while traveling through the warp thus left the Mantis Warriors free to return to their ancestral chapter domain once their century-long penitent crusade was over. And those were 40 facts on the Carcharodons. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, share it with your friends, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. This is Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Oh, I used to put my freedom first in anything.